everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday. Today, I am joined by our awesome managing attorney, Ruby Powers, and we are here to discuss what is an affidavit of support.
That's right, Daya. This is a really important topic.
Right? Okay, and then just some background info on our attorney. She's been licensed since 2008 and founded her firm back in 2009, and she's also a board-certified immigration attorney. Attorney Powers, do you want to take over?
Sure. So it might seem like a simple form, but nothing is simple in immigration. So that's the first thing you learn real quickly. But this form is really, it's not just a form. It's about proving that somebody who can sponsor or take care of, if you will, the intending immigrant so that they won't become a public charge. And so that's why it's called affidavit of support, proving that you will support that individual before they become a public charge. So let's go ahead and do a quick overview. Who's required to fill this out and submit this, and responsibilities. How long are you responsible as a beneficiary? Because some people ask that question. It's a really good point. And what is a joint sponsor? So this is I-864 affidavit of support is a contract an individual signs agreeing to use their financial resources to support the intending immigrant named on the affidavit. The individual who signs it becomes the sponsor. And, just side note, we use the word sponsor a lot, or people use it a lot in immigration. One is in this instance, and this is what I usually would use it in, but there's another one where you're actually sponsoring them for a job through employment or for a green card through work, and so through an employment situation. And so sometimes people use those interchangeably and get confused. So I just wanted to highlight this difference here in this webinar. And so the individual who signs the affidavit of support becomes the sponsor once the intending immigrant becomes a lawful permanent resident, otherwise known as green card holder. And it's usually the petitioner who files the immigrant petition on behalf. Usually it's the person who's petitioning for that visa is the one who's filling this out and completing it and signing off the contract of affidavit of support. But you can also have a joint sponsor if you don't meet the requirements. Now, it's legally enforceable, a contract, and the sponsor's responsibility usually lasts until the family member or the individual becomes a U.S. citizen or is credited with 40 quarters of work, or abandons their green card or passes away. And we have a slide on that to explain all those different scenarios. So who is required to file an affidavit? So all immediate relatives of U.S. citizens and relatives who qualify for immigration to the U.S. under one of the family preferences, the first preference, the second preference, the third preference, the fourth preference. So pretty much all the family scenarios. And the employment-based preference in cases only when a U.S. citizen or permanent resident filed the immigrant visa and the relative has a significant ownership interest in the entity that filed with the petition. But for the most part, we don't file these for the employment-based green cards, only in that specific situation. So a good way to remember would be for almost every family-based scenario and in some limited cases for unemployment. Now, what are the responsibilities? So when you sign it, you're accepting legal responsibility, you're signing a contract, and your obligation as a sponsor ends only when one of these four scenarios happen. The individual becomes a citizen, they work 40 quarters, which usually takes about 10 years for that to happen. They pass away, or they decide to quit being a legal permanent resident and abandon it and depart U.S. So that's about four different scenarios. And so we're asked that a lot with either joint sponsors or just individuals, just because they want to know. And this also becomes an issue if you sponsor or sign affidavit of support for multiple people, because if you do, then you still, and that other person that you petitioned for or sponsored still hasn't become a citizen or met the 40 quarters or what have you, then you need to continue to include them in your list of people you are sponsoring. And so sometimes people forget that. But if you've ever sponsored anybody in the past and they haven't met their qualifications to no longer be your obligation, then you need to include them if as a number of people you're still responsible for when you file the I-864 for another individual. So the sponsor must be a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national lawful permanent resident, 18 or older, have an income of 125% above the federal poverty line. And the guidance for that is you look at the I-864P. I-864P changes every February and March, just came out this month in 2022. I haven't compared numbers, but usually it goes up a little bit unless the economy is not doing so well. It might stay the same or go a little below. But the I-864P is where you go. And it also changes depending on what state you're living in and also if you're in the military, and that you have U.S. domicile. Now, this U.S. domicile can be a little bit of a curveball because if you're abroad and you're living abroad, you're making money abroad, and you've been abroad for a while, it might be hard to prove that you have U.S. domicile and you're intending to for this intending immigrant. But if you pay taxes, you maybe even have a U.S. job that you're working abroad, you have bank accounts, credit cards, and you can show that you're intending to return as soon as that immigrant visa has been completed, then generally we can overcome that. But that is another little curveball that can be an issue. Now, like I said in the beginning, it might seem simple. It might just look like a little innocent form, but no. There's so many little complications. In fact, we didn't go into all the little jujitsu math that you might have to know, because when you're improving that stat, how much money you make and things like that, you can also use asset tests. So not just your salary. If you don't meet their qualifications with your salary, you can also use assets. And you have to whip out some math, which gets a little confusing for some people, including the adjudicator, and you might have to make charts and explain it. So, but like, as we said, how long are you responsible until they become a citizen, have the 40 quarters, no longer legal permanent resident, or they lose their status or they pass away. And some people ask this, does divorce, terminate those obligations? No, it doesn't. Have I, at the moment of this recording, ever seen it enforced in a divorce proceeding? No, I haven't. And I've talked to other attorneys, and also we haven't seen it actually enforced. Now, a joint sponsor is when you have if you don't meet their qualifications yourself, is say you're trying to sponsor the individual, let's say you make just a little bit under the amount needed, or you're in school and you're not making money right now, or you haven't been employed, then you can find another U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident who meets the qualifications. You have to do the same test of looking through who they've sponsored, how much money do they make, and things like that. And then they have to sign the contract and are obligated as well. They don't have to be a relative. They don't have to be somebody you know very well, but usually it's somebody who knows you well or cares about you, who's willing to help you, because they have to show their employment letter, pay stubs, and taxes. And so it is a bit intrusive to have to show all of that financial information. Now, before we close up, I just want to say a couple of things. Generally, when you're showing the I-864P, and let's say you don't meet the qualifications, you could use the asset test. Now, generally when you're going to show the I-864P requirements, what you're going to do is you're going to show it with the employment letter, pay stubs, and taxes, if you're salaried or you're employed, and you can verify that information. So for a little quick trip down to the USCIS website, you can see this is the I-864P. And I'm usually working under individuals who are in the 48 contiguous states. So here we go. This is the way to read this. If the individual is, let's say it's just me and I want to sponsor my spouse, then that's two people in the household, no kids, let's say, then I need to make at least $22,887. Now, let's say I make $20,000. Well, what I could do is there's a difference of $2,887. If I'm sponsoring my spouse, that's an immediate relative, I'm a U.S. citizen in this scenario, then I would need to make 3 times as much of the difference, which is 2,887 times 3. And I would show that with either my assets in the bank, my maybe my equity in my home, or something, but it has to be assets that are liquid within about 12 to 13 months. So 2,887 times 3, it's $8,661 in assets. And I would show this little pretty chart where I have a job for $20,000, and I'd show the difference in this little and then I would show that I have at least 8,661. Now, that's just to give you a little idea. Now, if it's not an immediate relative, you use the 5, and I think it's just the spouse, actually. It's very limited circumstances where you get to use the 3 times rule. Most other times it's 5 times the difference that you need to show in your assets. And let's say you don't even have, let's say I'm sponsoring my brother or sister, and I don't have a job. And there's only me. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I'm just sponsoring my brother or sister. Then I would do 22,887 times 5, and I don't have a job. So I need to have at least 114,435 somewhere in a bank account that I can show sponsoring. So this is where I didn't want to scare you, but this is where it can get complicated. And so if you don't know this, I've been becoming one with the I-864 for a long time. There's a lot of times attorneys or firms will just say you have to have the job, or find a joint sponsor, but that's not true. You can also use the assets test. And that's why they ask all those questions on the form, and you're like, why are they doing all that? Well, it's because that's another way to demonstrate it. Some things are assets like home equity, retirement investments. Really, the test is that you can liquidate your assets within, I believe it says 13 months actually. But things like car ownership, that's not technically an asset in the mind of USCIS. So anyway, didn't mean to scare you on that, but I just wanted to let you know that there is some like high level I-864 knowledge that hopefully, if you're really needing help, it do exist. And if you if you need our help, let us know. If you're watching this and you're telling your attorney that, hey, this is a possibility, it is. And so that's all about I-864s in just a few minutes. Daya, how can they stay in touch with us?
Yeah, so to stay in touch with us, you guys can subscribe to our newsletter. That information is found on our website, or you guys can follow us on all of our social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We have our LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel that you guys can subscribe to, but there's a lot of good information on TikTok, so I do recommend you guys give us a follow. It is at Powers Immigration Lawyer. Yeah. There's so many usernames that I have them on store in my head, but our TikTok is Powers Immigration Lawyer, and there's a lot of good information on there. But thank you all so much for joining us for this Friday webinar, and go ahead and join us next week for our next webinar. We will